Now we have to consider when we go to places like families, houses and things like that, you have to make sure that William has space to be a sensory seeker. One favourite place he goes when we visit places is the bathroom. He'll immediately turn the taps on and have some fun with the water there.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because that's one of the things that hit me with my eldest is he gets so excited when we're at the supermarket in that loud, busy place. My youngest is the opposite and needs the headphones on and doesn't like the supermarket. But it's just fascinating, the differences, isn't it, between the individuals.
This is the Autism Central podcast for parents and carers of autistic people. We bring together autistic people, parents, carers and professionals to talk about different aspects of autism. Autism Central is a peer education programme commissioned by NHS England. It aims to build knowledge and understanding of autism and to empower families and carers to advocate for autistic people they support. Some of our podcast episodes contain specialist terms you may be unfamiliar with. We've put together a glossary to explain some of the terms mentioned. Please follow the link in our show notes to access this.
Hello, I'm Holly Sprake-Hill. I'm a neurodivergent specialist occupational therapist, and I'm your host for today. I'm also a late diagnosed autistic myself and a parent to autistic children. In this episode, we'll look at how you can support your autistic child's sensory needs when they have communication differences. So today we're joined by Jade Page and Paul Anderson, who are both parents of autistic children with communication differences. Hello, Paul, and hello, Jade.
Hi.
Hi, Holly.
Hi. So I'd like to just ask you about yourselves. Jade, should we start first?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Jade. I'm mum to two boys. They're both autistic. I've got a 10-year-old who is non-speaking and an 8-year-old who is echolalic and has minimal communication. I have been working with an autism charity now for about 8 years. So I have all sorts of conversations about communication all the time. So looking forward to today.
Fab. And Paul, tell me a bit about yourself.
Hi, Holly. So I'm Paul. I have a 6, nearly 7-year-old autistic son. He's non-speaking, although he did speak in the past when he was sort of 2, 3, 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I have had career difficulties because of his care needs, and now I've sort of settled on running an autism hub as my main career.
Oh, fantastic. It sounds like you've both got really interesting job roles that are focused around your family's needs. So do your children use any particular types of additional support to help their communication?
With my boys, it's interesting. With my eldest, who's non-speaking, we use what you term the total communication approach.
Yeah.
So it's kind of really accepting all forms of communication. So where he's looking, what his body language is doing, but also kind of pointing communication boards. We've used the picture exchange communication system in the past when he was younger.
Mm-hmm.
But as he's older, there's definitely more vocalizations and kind of communication is kind of an all round, lots of different ways to communicate, but without speech.
Yeah. Paul, tell me a bit about your child's communication style.
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, my son William, he mainly hand leads to communicate. So we've tried various alternative communication strategies, such as PECs. He's never really taken to any of them. He does use PECs in school. He's at a special school, and they've been pretty good with trying to promote use of PECs. But he's never really taken to it and doesn't really take to it at home. So much like Jade was saying, we tried to find a form of communication that suits him and meet him on his level, really. And at the moment, that is sort of being dragged around to things that he wants.
I remember being dragged around and that kind of it's those little things, like if your child stood in front of the fridge, then they're probably hungry. You pick up on these things, don't you? And it makes a difference.
And William can be quite specific as well with his dragging. So he'll put my hand on the key to turn the key to open the door, because he knows that's what has to happen, but isn't confident doing it himself.
It's amazing how much can be said without words, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's fascinating, really, because especially as my son gets older, that I think I went through a period when he was really small, kind of just always thinking, oh, he'll speak soon, or it will happen soon, and thinking about speech being really important. But he can tell me so much in so many different ways, and we really can communicate without very much spoken language. We can interact really well with people who speak different languages, because you can understand what people are doing through different contexts, through different gestures, and the way that we're interacting. And it's more about being more attuned to that person. And actually, more often than not, when we are speaking, we're not necessarily saying what we mean either. And it's not always that helpful when you throw speech in the mix sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hear that an awful lot with the autistic children and families that I work with. I'm also a parent to 2 autistic children. My second child had speech delay as well. And actually, even though both my children do use mouth words now, they don't always have access to spoken language. So it's not always very useful for them to communicate anyway. So we depend an awful lot on non-spoken language. Gestures, noises tell us a huge amount more about what they're going through than spoken words do. So what you're telling me, Paul, about your son's taking your hand is so powerful. It says a huge amount to me. Do you find that other people understand him as well as you do?
It can certainly be difficult. I think, like William, despite his difficulties and his lack of words, he's actually quite good and quite inventive when it comes to getting messages across to people. And it's like not being able to use language. You've sort of taken that out of the equation. How do I communicate this? And he seems to, like, when he bonds quite quickly. He's quite a people person, despite this stereotype to say that autistic people don't like people. And he bonds quickly with his caregivers, staff, teaching assistants, and that's largely through just showing them what he wants. And so I think he sort of takes the lead with his communication, which is interesting. Yeah, when we try and give him the tools to do that.
Can you expand on that a bit? Like, tell me how he might do that in his day.
When he's at school, basically, he will drag the staff to what he wants in the classroom. So whether that's a cupboard, a door to go outside, his lunchbox, his drink, anything like that, he's confident hand leading people to.
Mm-hmm.
It's mainly through the hand leading, really, that he achieves communication. Something else he likes is a massage as well.
Lovely.
So that sort of calms him down. So he'll go to somebody, he'll sit with them. They usually sit between their legs, take his shoes off, pull his trouser legs up. So that's indicating, I'm here and I'm ready for my massage. And
that is
fantastic.
Then
he'll put their hands to exactly where he wants the massage, usually his toes and toenails.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so he finds his ways.
So he's letting the person who his key trusted adult know exactly what he wants from a sensory perspective as well. There's adults that are neurotypical that aren't as clear in their communication. as your son is, as you've just described him. There's people going on assertiveness courses that don't have the skills that you've just described there. that is quite something.
Yeah. I guess we've always given in to his demands, which I see as a good thing.
Yeah, I do.
And I suppose that's given him some confidence, perhaps, to express what he wants. Yeah.
It's interesting, Holly's question as well about how easy is it for other people to understand, and I think I certainly feel the same about my kids. It's really clear what they're trying to express and what they're trying to say, and it's really interesting watching them with other people, because there are some people who are just brilliant with them and with kids and just attune straight away and are really just kind of paying attention, I suppose. And there's other times where you'll be watching them communicate something quite clearly, just not with speech, and somebody kind of looking obliviously at you. And quite often, especially when they were younger, I'd have people kind of turn to me and ask me, what does he want? What does he need? And things like that. And that's when you just start to get frustrated, and the rage, you have to be calm.
Yeah. So, to expand on that a little bit more for me, Jade. I'm really interested in that.
I think it's that typical thing. And I suppose it probably is kind of, it's difficult with friends and family particularly, because it's people that you might expect more of and you want them to kind of be paying more attention or engaging more. But equally, I think some people have expectations of how people should be and how people should communicate. And when it's different, I think some people find that really hard and then can't engage, if that makes sense. And it is really tricky. And you do find that lots of people are brilliant and are amazing. And I think it's the one thing I do find tricky, though, as a parent, is because, especially with a 10-year-old who now looks like a 14-year-old, is pretty tall, there's an expectation from society that he's going to speak and interact in a certain way. So strangers will regularly speak to him and expect you to talk back. And so often I'll kind of explain he's non-speaking, and I think it was a lot easier when he was tiny, because you sorry, he's in a bad mood, and kind of just move on. Whereas now there's the expectation he has to respond, and then as soon as you say, oh, he's autistic or non-speaking, some people kind of ask you loads of questions, or kind of want to know, can he use Makaton, or can he do this, that and the other? And that's fine some days, but there are other days when you just want to get out the supermarket and not have to explain your whole life every time, which is the tricky thing. I think that's what's exhausting, having to explain the difference all the time, not the fact that it's different, just having to constantly. And it's important to explain it when you can, because I need the world to understand that difference, because I need the world to accept his differences and make it easier for him when he is interacting with strangers. But yeah, it's tricky because it is exhausting, feeling like you have to teach everybody you come into contact with about those differences. Yeah,
I get that. I definitely do. So can I ask you guys, do your children have particular sensory processing sensitivities or sensory differences that you've noticed?
I think it's a really interesting one, because certainly when my kids were young, very young, kind of 2 or 3, when they were first kind of going through that diagnostic process, I have to be honest and say I didn't really understand or see the sensory differences at all. I could see the communication differences. I could see the social interaction differences. For me, the sensory side was all a bit of a mystery. And I think it's because it probably took me a while to realize just how different a sensory experience individuals can have. I think I was totally thinking everybody heard the same things and saw the same things in the same way, but we really, really don't. And so it took me a while to really understand those needs. And I think more so because my eldest is a real sensory seeker. My youngest is a sensory avoider when it comes to noise, which is a more obvious instant response to noise. And you can kind of see that quite clearly. Whereas with the sensory seeking element for my eldest, it really is that thing where he'd get excited in certain situations, or he'd be kind of seeking out interaction with certain things. And
Yeah.
I guess I just didn't see that as a sensory need, but actually now I recognize he needs sensory stimulation every day to meet that need. And it's really kind of opened my eyes to how much easier life is when you just have it kind of on tap and it's easy to access, and it's not a big deal to have fidgets in every pocket and whatever you need to get through the day. But yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think whenever you're asked what are the sensory needs for your child, it's hard to pin down sometimes, but knowing that they are there and they change constantly. I was interesting reading the OT report for my youngest, and it's kind of, he hit the top score for everything, kind of like, this is clearly a child that has sensory needs. But yeah, it really is that thing of those sensory needs and the adaptations that they need will change constantly, but recognizing and just being sensory aware makes so much difference of how we can interact and kind of spot those things to make sure they do get access to whatever it might be that they need in that situation.
Yeah. And Paul, can I ask you, because I guess you're in a very different life stage really, because William's so much younger.
Yeah.
How do you feel like William's sensory needs and your understanding of where he's at with his communication? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So William, it sounds, has many similarities to your eldest, Jade, which is despite the lack of age, the difference in age. So yeah, William is a sensory seeker too. And it sort of turns the stereotype of autism on its head again, in a way, because perhaps people who don't know so much about autism might imagine, an autistic child going around with headphones on, not liking crowds, not liking too much noise, hustle and bustle and that kind of thing. But William loves all that, really. And he's, one of the first notable things about William, in terms of him being a bit different to most other children when he was a small toddler, and possibly younger as well, was the need to be on the go all the time, like moving, running, climbing, balancing. So that really seems to provide him with some enjoyment, for one, and also it helps him to chill out, because he seems relaxed after he has a wild bounce on his trampoline, or a swim, or a climb on the TV, or something like that. And now we have to consider, when we go to places like families' houses and things like that, that you have to make sure that William has space to be a sensory seeker. So one favourite place he goes when we visit places is the bathroom. He'll immediately turn the taps on and have some fun with the water there.
Oh, water's great.
He also likes busy shopping centres, so we have Sprake-Hill near to us, and that's one of his favourite places to go and see the crowds. So quite unique.
It's so funny, isn't it? Because that's one of the things that hit me with my eldest is he gets so excited when we're at the supermarket in that loud, busy place. My youngest is the opposite and needs the headphones on and doesn't like the supermarket. And I've got family members who always get really challenging at the supermarket, shall I say, because it's such a difficult place for them to be. But it's just fascinating, the differences, isn't it, between the individuals. But the sensory seeking, it's the place to be. You've got noise, you've got busy, you've got so much to see and do. Yeah. It
must be hard with those two extremes in your two children.
Keeps me on my toes. Yeah,
yeah.
It's tricky, but.
So Jade, how have you coped with that? Those different, and especially if you've not had, the ideal would be, Mum, I'm just having a really difficult time dealing with this just right now, and I think I'd like to be somewhere else. But you haven't got that kind of high verbal sort of explanation of how difficult things are. So how do you cope with it in your home situation?
I think it's that kind of, you learn by trial and error, don't you, with parenting? And the reality is siblings are always going to trigger each other. I've just got the kind of challenge of their needs triggering each other, and that thing of where my eldest might want quiet and calm sometimes. My youngest, I think there's ADHD going on as well, and he wants 5 different devices on all at once and lots of things going on. So you do have those different competing needs all the time. I think it was really, really challenging when they were little sometimes. And there were times when I would feel like I couldn't go out to places without another pair of hands. And there were times where that would be really difficult. But now I think I'm far more aware of what triggers them. So I'm more aware of how we can manage certain situations and where we can go, just the 3 of us, and where I do need somebody else to help me out, and kind of managing different things. I mean, it helps when they're kind of going to school and I can do shopping and various other things kind of that you is harder when they're home all the time. But yeah, I'm lucky my husband's a teacher, so he's off in the school holidays as well, which makes a difference. But there are times when we have to, I mean, and actually interestingly, because my boys are in a resource base, even though they've got 2 years between them, they're in the same class in the specialist setting. And there are times when me and my husband have to say, right, we'll take them separate places and do separate things for
divide
a day.
And conquer.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you know what? It's easier when you're managing one than 2. So, but that has the strain on the relationship with the family, doesn't it? So it's, I mean, there's no perfect, but every family has to kind of just work out what works for you. And if we know something's going to be challenging, we know we have to go and jump on the trampoline for an hour before we go, or whatever it might be.
Sounds very familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you've described there is, when I see my neurotypical family friends parenting their children, I think, oh my gosh, how could you parent these 2 children that want to do the same things, or you do everything together as a family? That's so confusing. Why would you all want to do that? Why, and their children are having arguments in the back of the car and talking to each other and doing these things that like appear on typical television shows and soap operas. And I'm so, because we're all autistic in our household, I'm so removed from that world, I do not understand it. So for me, what you have just described is so normal that I'm like, well, yeah, of course you do that. Why wouldn't you do that? That is perfectly normal.
Yeah.
So what you've suggested there, for me, is like, that sounds like excellent parenting. Excellent parenting. It's just those people who've not been told that that's exactly what you should do to look after yourselves and your family, and not put neurotypical expectations on yourself, would think, oh, this, why am I doing it like this? This sounds awful. But actually, that's what you need to do.
I definitely had to learn that, if I'm honest, because I did have all those neurotypical expectations of my family life and wanting to do things in the same way that my friends were doing things. And it was actually more my issue than anybody else's, that I had to adapt my expectations. And as soon as I did that, life got a lot easier. And as soon as you kind of stop worrying about sitting around the table to have your dinner, and you can have kids running around while they're eating and this, that and the other, and forget about worrying about people jumping on the sofa and this, that and the other, life gets a lot easier and a lot calmer. It's just not what you might have expected.
What you were saying, Paul, about when you go to other people's houses and making sure that William has the space for running around and is safe. And it sounds like you having to do a lot of advocating for him.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit more about that and his sensory needs when you're out?
So on one side, it's the when we visit places, it's preparing ourselves, preparing him, also preparing the people we're going to see. That William likes to explore, basically, when especially if he's in a new place. And so we went to see some friends last week we hadn't seen for a while, and William didn't really know, and just had to tell them that he's probably going to want to explore your upstairs pretty soon because he likes going upstairs. So it's not a case of sitting down in the living room having a coffee and a chat. And, he'll be off doing his thing and in the bathroom as soon as possible. The other side of it is when we go out, because William is like quite an active boy, as you probably gathered, when we go out and in nature. So we do like hill walking, things like that. And well, that, as with when we go other places, we always have to make sure we've got his bag, which is really a really important tool. So in that, he's got a number of sensory items which help his sensory seeking. So some of them are just snacks, because he's got oral sensitivities as well. So he likes to be chewing, sucking on things. He has a drink bottle with a cap that he can sip from. He seems to like that. And he has dummies as well. Yeah. So, despite being 6 years old, he's always preferred the comfort of a dummy, even compared to other things which are specifically for children with sensory needs around their mouths. We always provide those for him if he feels like he needs them, I guess. So we have this goodie bag that we take out with us wherever we go, so he can usually go through all his snacks within half an hour sometimes, and then have a run around.
It sounds like preparation is key for a successful day out then. I mean, it's hard to imagine for some people, perhaps, the horror that we feel when we realise we've forgotten his dummy or a certain snack that he likes. Because you don't want to be stranded on a mountain and realising that. So definitely preparation helps.
I was just going to say, it's really interesting you're saying about nature, because I really think that there's like a sensory connection with nature for some individuals. And my son, particularly my eldest, he's free and happy in those kind of wild places on a mountain or this, that, and the other. Really, he connects to it in a way that I can't. And I've got other family members who have that same sensory need for being outside and being in nature. And it's really interesting for me because I don't have that, and I'm not really connected with nature, and I'm a typical hate bugs and this, that, and the other. So that's definitely an interesting one for me to get used to. But one thing that took us a long time to realize, we had a period where my son would be really struggling, and it probably took us a good couple of years to realize those periods where he was really struggling were often connected with seasonal change, because he's so impacted by the weather and connected to what's going on outside. And because for me, it would be the last thing I would even consider, is connecting my mood to the weather. It took us that long to realize how much he's impacted by it, and really recognizing that he needs to be connected with nature, but also we need to, he's older, he knows, but we had to do a lot of work to prepare and support him at those points where you get seasonal change, and so that he knew what was happening and was expecting it, if that makes sense.
So Jade, can I ask, was that about a change in temperature? What was the specific sensory issue around that for him?
I think the issue was probably more around change and struggling with change and that difference. But I guess he feels connected to nature, so his mood is impacted by the weather and the change. And I'm more aware now that when you get that point in the seasonal change, when we go from autumn to winter or we go from winter to spring, that everything does suddenly change up a little bit with the weather, and it does kind of get different, I suppose, for that period of time. And so I guess it's more about, he's got that sensory need for that connection, but then he's also got a challenge around things changing and transition. So it was kind of all mixed up into both of those things. But it's just recognizing, I think, that nature connection is something that I know I've got other family members who, and this is something that really helps me, is I've got other people I can talk to who are adults who are have similar needs, can really explain that actually they can't cope when they are not able to go outside and breathe in fresh air and go to other places. And because I have a younger child who's a runner, we would often have every window closed, every door locked, this sort of thing. So it's recognizing that need to go outside and spend time outside.
Yeah. Both of my children absolutely hate the outside and hate nature. And considering we moved from the city to the countryside for them, it probably was my least popular parenting move. It was prior to their autism diagnosis. In fact, it was prior to all of our autism diagnoses. But yeah, it did not make me a popular parent. And they are outside dodgers, definitely. It's quite awful, really. The sun is like poison. They're big animal lovers, but as long as they don't smell or lick or are inconvenient.
There's clean animals inside.
Yes. Yeah. But it's strange that, isn't it? How everybody, is, well, it's not strange. It's perfectly human. But, that autistic assumption from outsiders that, oh, well, you're autistic, so you must be a certain way. And actually, autistic people are the entire range of humanity. Of course they are, because we're all human beings, and that our sensory sensitivities will change throughout our lives. I used to be extremely uncomfortable in outdoor situations, but now I absolutely adore them. And I know that has been a change throughout my life. But it must be very interesting as a person who doesn't use mouth words to be able to communicate your love or dislike for the outdoors or nature without that ability to tell somebody directly.
It's interesting with William because he's, as I mentioned earlier, he's quite good at communicating what he needs to people, but he seems to be quite good at just knowing what he needs in general, which I'm always impressed by. So he'll in the summer, he'll basically be on his trampoline as soon as he gets into the house, as soon as he comes home from school, straight out there, usually dragging me on, and we'll have at least half an hour of bouncing on the trampoline. It's good exercise for me. But then suddenly, and it happened the last few years, like sometime around November, he'll just decide, oh, that's not for me anymore. It must be something in the weather, something in the light. And he just hasn't, this year, again, like since then, he just hasn't shown any interest in his trampoline. And apart from a one-off one morning when it was particularly sunny and we went and had a bit of a bounce, but he just seems quite tuned in with maybe like your son, Jade, with the weather, what's going on outside, and he seems to know when it's going to be good for him to be outside and when it's best to climb on the TV instead.
Yeah, well, we definitely have a gap where we don't use the trampoline that much in the winter. It's same. It sounds very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So, just bringing it back to some of the in-house issues around your sensory-seeking children, how do you keep them safe? Like, what are some of the things that you have to do within the house to keep them safe around those seeking behaviours?
I think the hard thing is often just having eyes in the back of your head. You really need to kind of know where they are and what they're doing a lot more than you would with other children. I regularly have my nieces with me, and it's funny, your instinct kind of tells you I don't need to follow them around. They can just get on with things and you'll hear when something goes wrong. Whereas with my kids, whilst they have a lot more freedom than they did when they were younger, I definitely was that helicopter parent where you're kind of stood over them all the time. And I hated having to do that, but actually I needed to do that for safety. We do have locks in parts of our house where we're put away bleach and whatever else and this sort of thing, because it isn't safe. And only yesterday, my son was reaching for the scissors because he wanted to cut open a squishy toy, because I think he wanted to explore whatever was inside it. And fair enough,
completely understandable.
It is that thing of it's hard for him to recognise dangers, I suppose, and what's safe and what isn't safe. And I think with my youngest as well, he's got that same kind of oral need, and so he will regularly put things in his mouth that's not safe to put in your mouth. And the reality is you just have to kind of know where everything is in your house and what's safe and what's not, and where they are and what they're doing, which I think is really tricky sometimes, just to keep them safe. Because sometimes it's fine. I mean, that whole water play, it's annoying to clear up kind of water all over the floor, but it's safe and it's not a big deal. So actually that's not so much of a problem. But making sure that you have got a bit more awareness about what they've got access to, safety wise, I think sometimes, because I think that's the trickiest thing for me anyway.
It's a trial and error thing, isn't it? Of when it's the error, it can go really horribly wrong as the water comes flooding through your ceiling because you left a plug around or something like that, and they decided to leave the taps on. So
and
Paul,
I think it's also that thing about having things available, isn't it? And actually, one thing my youngest loves to do is have like a slime bath or something like that, or have and actually finding the things that will meet those sensory needs and putting them there so they're available and doing it with them. So hopefully they won't go seeking out for something that's less desirable.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of spoons as a parent, doesn't it? That takes a lot of proactive thinking and a lot of time and energy on your part, that sometimes if you're already meeting everybody else's needs all the time, sorting out school, sorting out yourself, trying to keep a job, that's really hard. Really hard.
Very difficult.
Yeah, I can appreciate that from both sides.
Yeah, definitely.
So Paul, from your perspective.
So, certainly at home, there are a lot of measures we have to put into place to keep William safe. One of them is around windows. Yeah. So he loves to be on windowsills and just loves looking out of windows at the world going by. And when he does his climbing, which he does a lot outside and inside, he's usually quite safe, and he very rarely hurts himself. But it's not worth the risk, is it, when it's an upper floor window? So we have in his room a window restrictor on his window. There's little cable things that stop them opening more than a few inches. And then the other room he loves upstairs, which is a spare room, and I use as my office too. He spends a lot of time in the window there, so we just always have those windows locked. And it's just as Jade has said, the sort of things that maybe parents of neurotypical kids wouldn't have the instinct to be vigilant around. We have to be there, like whatever William's doing at home, just to make sure he is being safe and also not breaking things. So he's broken our TV in the past.
We've had that happen.
Well, our TV is now up high on the wall, but he still manages to hang off it.
I feel like they need a giant iPad cover, like one of those super tough Gorilla iPad covers on the TV.
I think you can get things like that.
But for it not to look institutional, for it to look really cool at the same time, there's definitely a gap in the market there, guys. Definitely. So I guess for us to round up, I would say, is there anything that you would want to tell other parents who are in your position, or anything that you would like to have heard when you were starting out on your journey?
I guess thinking about the sensory needs for me, I think one thing that really makes a difference is just having access to lots of sensory stuff, but also that it doesn't need to be, you don't need to go online and buy autism sensory stuff. And I think because as soon as you do that, the price goes up. And actually a Wendy house from a supermarket it does the same kind of job as these super duper dark tents and everything else like that. So it doesn't need to be specialist sensory equipment. And there's loads of fantastic charities doing lending libraries and this, that and the other out there.
Yeah.
And trying loads of different things, going to places where you can try different sensory experiences, and then having those things just available around the house all the time. Because actually, I think a lot of children wouldn't be able to verbalize, even if they could have kind of the ability to use speech, their sensory needs at a young age. It is them trialing and erroring and working it out and just being drawn to certain things. So really kind of trying different things and being open to different ways of playing, and not trying to get your child to play with the latest toy that every other child is playing with, and actually accepting that something that spins round and round for hours is actually just as exciting. So it's really embracing that sensory play as early as you can just makes life so much easier, because your kids will become more regulated, more relaxed, and happy children mean happy parents. So that's
music to my ears. Absolutely. Anything from you, Paul?
Yeah, I guess to follow on from what Jade said, really, I would say let yourself be led. Yeah, it's very tempting. We've fallen into this trap as well, to have expectations about what a child should be doing at a certain age. And sometimes we've just got to sit back a little bit, metaphorically, and probably only metaphorically, and just let them be, and I think they will show us to an extent what they need, and ways they want to interact, ways they want to play, ways they want to learn.
Yeah. It's interesting you use the term let yourself be led, because you've said that William takes your hand and leads you places, and it sounds like you're so in tune with him. And some of the things that you've said that have come out really clearly is that he shows you a lot of beautiful things. Like he takes you to the trampoline and you go trampolining together. It actually gives me goosebumps thinking about it, because he's showing you what he wants. And if that's not what being a parent-child relationship is about, then, what is it about? Because that just sounds like a really beautiful moment between the two of you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences, Jade and Paul. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely.
Thanks for having us.
You've been listening to the Autism Central podcast. Find out more about our programme for parents and carers of autistic people at autismcentral.org.uk. Information related to strategies and approaches discussed in the Autism Central podcast is based on guests' personal perspectives and experiences, and does not constitute advice or endorsement from the Autism Central programme. Autism Central would encourage listeners to do their own research and make informed decisions about any strategies or equipment mentioned in this podcast. Any advice or suggestions given by a guest do not replace or substitute advice received from direct consultation with a qualified professional. The Autism Central podcast is produced by Autism Central and is the copyright of NHS England. All rights reserved.